I think New Orleans is my favorite city. I moved here for the first time back in 2013, and then took a brief little hiatus and went to Houston for a couple of years. I just returned. And sort of doing that during that stretch, particularly during the pandemic, got to participate in another sort of adjacent program for early stage Black philanthropists in education. And one of the activities that we did was coming up with a 20-year vision. And so, it gave me an opportunity to really reflect on my personal values, what's important to me, sort of the impact that I wanted to have in the world. And one of the things that emerged from that exercise for me was around this concept of financial freedom, financial independence in particular. And it's sort of been important for me to sort of be following this journey and pursuing, financial independence. So independence from needing to work. I think that's sort of the true definition of being financially free, is having control over your labor. And that particularly important to me as a Black woman, and wanting to make sure access to information about that in particular, and about sort of how do we generate freedom for ourselves in the community, was an important part of sort of my life's work. And so that showed up in the vision. It challenged me to say, well, what have I done to help spread the word? And, I've always been a writer. I think it's one of the ways that I communicate best. And so writing the book was sort of a natural next step. It showed up on the 20-year vision. I said I had written the book. And so, of course, the next thing I had to do was write it. So I had spent some time sort of mapping out the most important lessons that I have learned over the course of my life, the things that I felt the worst about. And, it's really like, man, if I could go back, these are literally the things I would change. How can I sort of spread information so folks can avoid making these same mistakes, in addition to what's the pathway sort of to overcome any previous mistakes that we may have made? And then how do we sort of increase access to information about the financial independence, early retirement movement itself, but just also the basics of investing and of sort of financial health and wellness, and sort of cutting through a lot of the noise, I think, that exists in the financial space. Got a lot of gurus making a lot of money, saying lots of stuff. But there are some basics that sort of folks who understand finance know across the board. And so how do we sort of cut through some of that noise to make sure everyone has access to the very basic tools that they need to be financially whole and well and to build wealth? So that's sort of what got me to write the book. And it really was just a labor of love. As I'm going to put this out, if it reaches one other woman who finds it to be helpful, my mission will have been accomplished. We published the book last fall, and it hit the bestseller list immediately on Amazon, and it has just been running from there. So I've been so blown away and excited about reception to the book. And I'm happy to keep talking about it and thinking about additional ways to support folks who read the information and want to chat with me. So excited to be here today.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I've read the book, and I 100% recommend it to everybody on the program, and I will keep doing so. I really enjoyed it. Even though I'm not necessarily the target audience, I thought the lessons in there were very useful. I think anyone would benefit from them. Reading the book, you talk a bit about your childhood, and I wanted to know a bit more about how that impacted your approach to financial wellness in general.
I think initially the impact of growing up in sort of a working class family gave me the value of education. So that was sort of the ticket that my mom pushed for us to get out of our financial circumstances. And in some ways that did work. So I was, the first person in my family to earn a college degree, and sort of entered the middle class via education as a pathway. But I think, growing up in that environment and some of the habits and values that I picked up around handling money probably handicapped me a little bit early on. I learned some lessons the hard way around debt and spending and money management. But at the end of the day, I think because I was able to be successful on the education front, it motivated me to say, well, I've got to educate myself on this. College isn't going to teach me. Obviously, high school isn't. I can't reach out to family to get these lessons. So it's going to be up to me to educate myself on how to take care of myself financially.
Absolutely. And were there any sort of specific moments that kind of pushed you into, educating yourself on these lessons?
I think I had a wake up call sort of hitting 30. When folks remember back when you hit 30, sort of like, I'm an adult. And it caused me to reflect on sort of where I was financially. And, I had to admit to myself that I had done everything. I followed all the advice that was given to me. I went to college, I went to graduate school, I was doing work that I loved, and I went and bought a nice car. I was doing all these things. And yet I did not feel successful financially. I felt very constrained and constricted. I felt broke at the end of the day. And that was not the fulfillment of the promise that was given to me. And so I realized that I needed to start doing some things differently and get really focused and really intentional about the financial aspect of my life.
Absolutely. And, would there, aside from say just, saving more in this journey, what are the kind of key lessons that you can kind of share in this forum that you've learned, throughout this process?
A big one for me was getting out of debt. I think I've been raised to think that debt was normal and good. And, particularly in a family and community where, access to lending was severely limited. It's like my mom couldn't just go buy a new car. The fact that I could do that, which is exactly what I did at age 22 with my fancy degree, is like went to a dealership and bought a brand new car, was celebrated in my family. And I remember my mom being so proud. Wow, my daughter doesn't need a cosigner on this loan, right? And so I think those were the values that I had, and hadn't sort of realized the detriments and downfall of having so much of your monthly income tied away in debt payments and sort of the impact that it has on you, both financially, but also psychologically. And so getting out of debt was probably one of the biggest, most important decisions and steps that I made. And then figuring out, once you have this extra room in your budget, what to do with that money. And so it sort of opened up the possibility of saving, of spending on things I think are fun, and on investing itself.
Yeah, and one of the things I really liked about the book is at the end of each chapter, you have a kind of, a workout section where you go through examples that relate to your life that people could then kind of use as essentially a template for what they're doing with their financial futures. So I thought that was a really useful part of the book. So in terms of where you kind of got your when you went out to learn all this, what were the best kind of sources for you of learning, and then which are the ones that you'd recommend people really avoid when it comes to this kind of big world of financial advice? Because you're right, there's tons of information out there. A lot of it isn't good. From somebody who works in the financial education and wellness world, I see a lot of bad advice out there. Sometimes it's in books or YouTube videos, sometimes it's from family members. So for you, where did you start that process of educating yourself?
So in terms of the debt piece, I happened upon Dave Ramsey's book, The Simple, or was it the Total Financial Makeover?
He has a lot of them.
Really helpful for me, just in terms of starting to think about the possibility of being debt free. It just hadn't even crossed my mind because debt was so normal to me. Dave Ramsey, is quite a problematic figure, and so I sort of don't recommend him and his book at this point, just in terms of my own personal values. But I do credit him with getting me started. And essentially what happened for me as I was sort of making my way through this debt-free journey, having access to more money and wondering what's next, it's when I sort of bumped into the FIRE community, which is sort of folks I have great faith in. I think these are kind of nerdy, mathy people who, are not here for scams and financial craziness. They're like, great, let's put this in a spreadsheet. Here's the step-by-step easy way. And via that community, found some resources that I found to be quite reputable and simple to follow. One book that I do love and often recommend is The Simple Path to Wealth by J.L. Collins. And I love it because it's sort of short, and it's a book he wrote for his daughter on how to sort of become financial independent the easy way, assuming she's not going to grow up and want to work in finance. It's like, what are the very simple, basic things to do to build wealth in your own life? And another sort of podcaster, blogger who sort of gotten to know over the years and have great trust in is a woman called Paula Pant, who has a podcast called Afford Anything. And she's another sort of just super personable, relatable, nerdy. I love a good nerd person, who, and you can just call into her show and ask questions and get just a really well-reasoned answers to basic and complex financial issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are some good books. And I agree on your point with Dave Ramsey. Yeah, I think somebody who has become increasingly problematic, and there's someone I now tell people to, there's a lot of other resources out there that teach you the same thing without the problematic side of things. You talked about the FIRE community earlier. For those of people who don't know, can you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so FIRE, it's an acronym, stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. And I think, the acronym and the community have picked up steam over sort of the past several years, but it's been around for quite a while, this sort of concept of working yourself out of a job and amassing enough wealth to be able to live off of that money. And really it's, the interest and dividends from your investments indefinitely. Mr. Money Mustache is sort of my go-to FIRE guru. And I think most people who, become familiar with the FIRE movement start off on his blog and then maybe expand to some additional folks. And so he's super frugal and has done all the math, and you can sort of see how it all works. I think what's encouraging to me about FIRE and sort of about this investing method is the simplicity of simply, socking away as much money as you can, into an index fund based investment portfolio and living off the interest. I mean, that's the entire strategy. It's not complicated. It's not hard. You don't need a financial advisor. You don't need all this stuff. And there's a whole community of people who are doing that. And so I found that to be encouraging. I take a more balanced approach myself because I like my job. and so I'm not, if you are motivated to get out of your job as soon as possible, you could take a stronger, more extreme approach. But for me, I take a balanced approach. So I'm here for the investing philosophy and sort of the portfolio strategy, but I don't have to put 70% of my income away. And I can spend some of it because I like my job. And so I'm not trying to retire, in the next few years.
Yeah, I think that piece of the book is something that you don't hear enough of, is about investing in index funds, and that you don't necessarily need, a fancy financial manager who's taking a percentage fee of your money to manage something, when index funds are probably one of the safest and best ways of putting your money safely away and growing it over time. So I think that was definitely a bit that spoke to me, and something that I try and teach through our program as well. It's if you want to day trade, maybe do that for fun, but it's most people lose out in the long run, and yeah, it's definitely a losing strategy overall. Aside from debt being a good thing, were there any other kind of bad habits or things like that you feel like is kind of established wisdom that you tell people, you realize is really not a good thing?
Now that I sort of talk to a lot of young people, and the most common questions that I get from them, I'm sort of super curious how the financial industry has taken over the financial literacy world and are training young people to be good customers of financial institutions as opposed to training young people to build wealth, which I'm greatly concerned about. So this is something I think about a lot nowadays. But kids are very concerned about credit scores. How do I build credit? How quickly can I get a credit card to build credit so I can buy stuff and be in debt? It's like, okay. And, you know, even home ownership itself, which is such a tricky subject because we know much wealth has been built over time via home ownership. And we know that particularly communities of color and African-American communities have been specifically prevented from home ownership and from being able to build wealth using that as a tool. However, I think we therefore think of it so simplistically. Every single person must own a home, and you are not financially well if you are not a mortgage holder. And yeah, I would much rather folks, instead of being obsessed with building credit and getting mortgages, be obsessed with building wealth. Like how much money, if you lost your job tomorrow, how long could you live on the money that you have? I wish every person were obsessed with the answer to that question.
Yeah, same here. When it comes to building credit, you know, do you have any kind of specific advice? Because that's one of the main things we encounter at Flyte is folks who've had situations outside of their control. Are there any piece of advice you can offer for people who are trying to, you know, rebuild their credit over the long term?
I do use credit. But I find credit to be very risky. And I think that we have to treat it with the caution that it deserves. So I often advise folks, if you have a credit card, to use it for predictable bills, like set it up for your cell phone bill and not keep it in your wallet and swiping every day. And this, you know, in terms of sort of my own self-management, I know I'm a pretty impulsive person. I can come up with 1,000,001 reasons to spend whatever money I have access to in my wallet when I see something that I want. So for me, it's been important not to keep, if I don't want to spend that money, I cannot keep it in my wallet. I cannot keep it in my Amazon wallet. I cannot just have ready access to the money. And that is sort of how I keep myself from going back into debt after working so hard to get out of it. So, you know, I would say be extremely cautious and do the bare minimum that's needed, you know, to rebuild credit, but really then be focusing on making sure you've got a strong emergency fund. So the next time there's an emergency, you don't think you need to use your credit card, and make sure that we're sort of getting these other financial foundation pieces in place so that you can work on wealth building as opposed to simply credit building.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And also getting everything to pay automatically is another one. That's what I do, is having auto pay set up every month so that at least, and more than the minimum, it's like having the whole thing if you can. But you shouldn't, hopefully, just not be spending more than you have available to spend in the first place. In terms of, you know, the obstacles to building long-term wealth, what were the chief ones that you encountered on your financial journey in terms of, you know, building that strong financial platform and financial freedom?
Yeah, I think sort of the most obvious one is having access to money in the first place to invest. It's sort of like you cannot budget your way out of poverty. You actually need money. And so and you'll, you know, in the book you saw this, but sort of I really focus on helping particularly women of color. We need to earn more money. We just do. And I think that has to be strategy number one. And then for me, it was important to get out of debt so that I could use that money for other purposes. Sort of really hard to spend less and easier to sort of repurpose. So once I freed up a debt, I could take that money and put it toward a savings goal, put it toward, you know, an investing goal. And so I think that's been an important part of the strategy for me, is repurposing, rethinking about how do we allocate the money in our budget, and setting ambitious goals around that. So my goal is like, I need to double my salary, which I did, and then only spend half my salary. Those are like the two most important decisions that I made. And nowadays I invest half of the money that I bring in every month. And that, you know, that's my slow fire method. like spend half of it on whatever I want, like no guilt, however I want to spend it. If I want to order Uber every day, Uber Eats. If I want to go on trips, I don't care. It's my money. I worked hard and I earned it. And as long as I save half, then I should feel completely guilt-free spending the rest on whatever I want.
Yeah. Is there a certain, for someone who's just getting started out, is there a percentage that, you say you'd recommend people start saving every month and putting into investments, or is it up to them?
It depends on, I think it's hard to tell people to save if you feel like you don't have enough money.
Yeah.
So I would say, let's get the money up.
Mhm.
And maybe set a goal for how much of that new income you're going to save. And even when I was getting out of debt, I got a bunch of side jobs. I was coaching, I was doing all this stuff, and 100% of that side hustle money went towards debt pay down. So I think it's easier to have goals around both at the same time. Here's how much extra money I'm going to bring in, and here's what I'm going to do with that money. I personally, if I were talking to a young person who hasn't already gotten themselves into debt and gotten a bunch of financial obligations, I think 50% is a reasonable goal, but I would start at 20 and work your way up to 50. I think by the time you're our age, 50 just sounds crazy. So you're like, 50, how could I possibly? So, all right, I'm with you. See what you can do with the excess. So see how much more money you can bring in, and then set some ambitious goals around what do you do with that extra money.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, especially around the goal setting piece. I think that's one of the things that we try and do. A lot of it Flyte is set realistic goals. I mean, they should be good goals, but they should be ones where you're not setting yourself up for a fall, because otherwise somebody will feel bad about themselves if they're not hitting that goal, and then it kind of takes people back to square one. So definitely. I'll do one more question on my end, and then I'll sort of hand things over to the floor so people can start thinking about any questions that they have, hopefully. Yeah, I enjoyed your section about college loans and debt and things, around your experiences with it. What was really good was you talked about, there's lots of pathways to getting more affordable education, or finding the same education for less. Was that, did you just have to do tons of research on that section, or was that something that you just kind of came across when you were doing your college experience?
No, I love that section because I work in education. So that's actually like my bread and butter section. I was like, this is what I really want to talk about. And it's one of those things where you see so much misinformation about college that I just feel so strongly and have so many emotions when I hear, especially young people from low-income backgrounds who are really smart getting terrible advice, which is so commonplace. I used to be an admissions officer at Harvard, and we just read these essays of kids who are perfectly admissible, counselors just telling them they should never apply and it's a waste of time and they'll never be able to afford to go. And I'm like, this is going to be free for you. So I'm hoping that chapter clears up a lot of misinformation. I hope it empowers every reader to sort of be the source of accurate information to the young people in their lives. But yeah, that was definitely
I think that was for me. I mean, I'm not a college student, but for me, that was one of the most interesting sections, because that's not an area of expertise and we don't really teach that very well on our programs either. So it's another reason why I'm like, I really want people on the program to read this book, because that there is, people often really overpay for a degree that they could get for much less, and they don't explore all scholarship ideas and things about the counselors having tons of kids to work with, and not really having the time to find particular scholarships and things like that for kids. So there's there's a lot of work to be done on the parents and the child's end, but it often can be very, very fruitful. Fantastic. I will hand it over to our audience. And hopefully some folks have some questions for Paris, and you can unmute the microphone or type in the chat box. I'm easy.
I don't necessarily have a question, but I really enjoyed this Q&A. Just from your questions, you kind of went over a lot of things that I'm struggling with. As far as the the student loan part. It's difficult. I'm back in school, so it's difficult for me not to accept the student loan because I have a full house with husband, children, dogs. So it's, how do I make my way through that? I get a couple of scholarships from the school that I'm at, but it's not nearly enough to pay for the whole tuition or whatnot.
Yeah. What are you studying?
Psychology.
Mm-hmm. And
Yeah.
what are you planning to do with your degree?
So I do want to have a regular 9 to 5, but I also want to open up a marriage and family counseling, mostly marriage, like at night, because most people work in the daytime, and that's how I did my counseling with my husband. So I enjoyed that so much that I really want to do that, and I really want it at a low cost because it's so expensive, especially if you don't have insurance. So that's my real goal, is to open up a marriage counseling for especially Black people. We don't really think that counseling is needed for marriage or anything else, and that's really my goal.
Mm-hmm. I love that. So you're gonna have to get a license. You're hoping to become like a licensed
Yes,
professional.
ma'am. Yes.
Mhm.
Mhm.
One of those stories that I tell in the book was a young lady I was working with. Someone had referred her to me, and she wanted to switch. She was in marketing and she wanted to become a nurse. And so she was looking at these master's programs, and she had gone to, fancy private school for college, just like I had, just like, the woman who referred her to me had. And we had really strong financial aid in undergrad, sort of didn't have to pay. I didn't pay at all for that Harvard degree, and so she was looking for similar quality schools for this master's degree and was having trouble finding financial aid. And so that's how she got to be speaking to me. And so one of the things we sort of talked about was, how do we assess what we need out of the program? And so for her, she's making a career switch. She's going to have to pass a licensing exam. And so we're less interested in rankings. We're less interested in finding the fancy, private, expensive option, and more so looking at what is the cheapest possible option she could find that's going to prepare her to pass that exam. Sort of a very basic, targeted focus. So I think of graduate school as very different from college. It's sort of tied to career interests. So I'm actually really happy to hear that you have a very clear career goal. You're not just doing this for fun because you think a master's degree would be a good idea.
Yeah.
Like the biggest scam is just a master's degree.
Yeah.
But so, I would encourage you to make sure that you're in the most affordable program you can find that's going to help you pass that licensing exam. And because I had considered becoming a counselor and have just like looked in all the sort of like the hours. So there's, you got to pass a license. We also need your hours. And so I would be, even more invested in getting hours than speeding through the degree. Even if you could go part-time and cash flow it and be spending the other part-time getting your hours so that you're prepared, to get your license. So I think you're in a position to really be a smart consumer. Okay. And be asking, like, what am I getting for the money that I'm putting in, and not just automatically assuming you have to take the loans route. And even if you do take loans, thinking about how few you can possibly take out, and after you finish, how quickly can you pay it off?
Okay. Yeah. We did in the beginning, we paid off, as we paid out of pocket, and I'm like, okay, we can't keep doing that. But I'm very I'm frugal on that end. So I am definitely looking into, like you said, I just wanted to make sure I was going the right way with it. I'm definitely looking into the cheapest way of doing this, because I don't need some brand name some brand name graduate school. I just need to get, like you said. So so I'm doing okay.
Yeah, okay. I'm in a doctoral program now. Okay. And so I follow my own advice. I'm not telling you to do anything I wouldn't do, but particularly priced out programs, and I'm paying cash. I'm just paying for my tuition as I go. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, Paris. Thank you for being here with us this evening and sharing all this good information with us. I have not read the book, and I know you know it is my plan to read the book and also to share with my cohort of residents. But I've heard you mention young people. I've heard you say you've had conversations with young people. I'm just a little bit curious as to what is the target audience or the target age that you would suggest this book for.
Yeah, so it's definitely not a young adult book. Although I acknowledged that my little high school self was reading Rich Dad Poor Dad and all these personal finance books because I'm a weirdo and I understand that's not normal. So if you want to give it to a young person like that, they will certainly benefit from learning, particularly because a lot of, some of the mistakes I started making, I made right at 18, right out of the gate, getting into debt, but really targeting folks early on in their careers who are just starting to set up sort of financial goals and plans. And then folks sort of in this mid-career phase, like myself, I'm about 40 years old now, who are realizing what they've done in the past is not working and want to figure out how to turn things around. So those would be sort of two target groups for the book.
Thank you.
Thanks,
I will say if you're sort of in 60s or so, getting ready to retire, this may just upset you more than anything reading this book. Is what I experience talking to folks, particularly when I do presentations for young people and the adults in the room are so sad because I'm going to set the young folks up for what's a 30-year sort of investment horizon, that kind of thing. So I would say, if you're looking to retire on your Social Security in the next couple of years, you probably won't find the strategies that helpful. Big V, I don't know what you think about that, but that would be my one caution.
Yeah, I mean, they always say the best day to start is today. But there are certain times when I'm like, I think, it becomes more and more difficult the older you get if you haven't done anything to prepare for, your financial future. So I definitely think like 18, reading the book, I'd say anyone from the age of 18 onwards would benefit from it. I certainly wish I'd been taught these things, and I came from a fairly educated and affluent family, but even my folks didn't teach me very much financial wellness, and I made a ton of mistakes. So it's it does happen to all walks, but in my case, there was more of a safety net, so it's a different situation. But yeah, I mean, I started working for a bank in 2012, and I didn't know how credit cards worked. That's how bad I was. So, but I didn't have a credit card, thankfully. If I had one at college, I would have absolutely I would have. But I would say that I was lucky that I was made to put together a budget, and that was one thing that really helped. So, the earlier the better, as far as I'm concerned, especially when it comes to saving for retirement. Just even starting to get into the habit of paying yourself when you start getting that first paycheck is really, really important. So, and these are all things that the book covers in tons of detail. So yeah, I really strongly encourage people to get the book and share it with friends, because I think it's one of the best. I've read a lot of financial wellness books in my work, and I think it's really one of the best I've read in general. So anyway, I'm waffling, as they say. Is there anyone else who wants to ask a question? We still have about 20 minutes left, so please ask away.
Hi. I'm not sure if you can really hear me. I'm outside. But what's the name of the book you're speaking on?
It's The Black Girl's Guide to Financial Freedom.
Okay. Your book. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions out there? Especially relating to college admissions and loans. Paris is an expert.
Well, hey everybody.
Hey,
I'm riding in the car, but just this was a very good question and answer period. I haven't read the book myself, but I plan on getting it and reading it with my daughter, who is going to be a junior next year. I'm 42 and I'm petrified because I really haven't saved anything towards retirement. My job puts a couple of dollars in my 403B, but I did have an IRA, but I had to use it for just to live on when I was laid off from work. So I heard you talk about having alternate jobs. So I have a full-time job, I have my business, but then what other things do you think I could do to make additional money to start saving rapidly?
I have to admit to you that I'm a big believer in avoiding hustle culture. It's just not even aligned. Like, I need rest. I can't work myself into the ground. And it's sort of part of this value system that I believe. So if I believe in financial freedom, I have to be experiencing freedom on the path. So whatever I think is going to happen to me in the future, I need to experience it now. And if you read the book, you sort of hear me speak about that and speak about, my mother losing her early and just realizing that I cannot sacrifice my life today for something I hope will happen in the future, because anything can happen to me today. So I would just preface my answer with that, just so you know where I'm coming from. And so for me, it was important for me to think about, with my day job in particular, I needed to make more money. So I'm not going to spend more of my time working for less money. I need those 8 hours every day to pay me more. So that became a top strategy for me. So I think that would be the first question that I would ask you, because you sound busy, you have a job, you have a business. So I would say, how can we go back and get more money out of the things that you're already doing, as opposed to taking on more jobs? And I just feel so strongly about this, particularly as Black women. I think, our labor is already so undervalued, and a lot of people are getting rich off of us trading our time for not enough. So I have to start there. And the other thing, when I think about sort of investing and folks wanting to invest, I always suggest starting a really strong emergency fund first. And for the reason that you stated. So none of us can count on our jobs. And even myself, I was laid off at the beginning of last year. I got laid off unexpectedly in the middle of the pandemic. And I think the best thing that I had done for myself was have an emergency fund set up, so that I didn't have to worry about working. I can take 6 months off and travel and have fun and do all of that. So I put myself in a really privileged position. And so the very sort of worst case scenario, that's what the emergency fund is for. If you lose your job, could you buy yourself 6 months? I think that'll be a really good first goal, before even thinking about sort of pouring money into investments for the longer term. Because if you invested, I would want you to leave it in there forever and never need it. So what other sources of money could you use for the inevitable occurrence of emergencies, which are going to come up, right? We know the car is going to break down. We know we're going to get a medical bill. We might lose our jobs. All of that is inevitable. So how can we start putting away some money now to be prepared for that?
Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks, Joe. Anybody else have any questions? Still got about 15 minutes.
Hi, Paris. I really want to thank you for that comment, because as we're sitting here talking and trying to figure out more ways to earn income, the first thing to do is, find another side hustle, find another gig. So I really do appreciate you saying that, because it's not healthy. And I have definitely been a victim of that recently, and had a friend say, "Are you crazy? You're one person, and there's so many hours in a day." So thank you.
Any other questions out there? I guess my question for the audience would be, who here is now thinking about buying the book versus beforehand and now? Just out of
I
curiosity.
purchased it already, so thank you. I purchased already.
Amazing. Great.
Yeah.
Ashley, I see your hand going up. Excellent.
Thanks
Today,
for your support, guys.
excellent. Thank you. That's great to hear. Yeah, I mean, any final thoughts, parents? Anything you'd like to share with the giant viewership of Flyte, or I guess any final thoughts from people on this Q&A? Would you like us to do more Q&A things like this, and bring in more people? Oh, there's some comments here. So Jim.
Yes, I would like it. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know if you want us to speak or.
Yeah, or you can just you can put your hand up,
yeah.
or you can type right in the text. I got a comment here from Jim. My parents never did teach me that I should have a side hustle. However, I now hear how important that is for every entrepreneur. Any thoughts on the side hustle?
Let me say, so I want to, I wrote a book. The book is selling every month, right? And pays me thousands of dollars, right? And so in a way, this book is a version of a side hustle that doesn't require me to do work. So now it sort of is an asset that will continue to pay me every month, right? So I do think it's important. I think the most important thing that I have learned is not to be reliant on my day job, and to have a backup plan, to have a stash of cash, to have like what J.L. Collins, one of my favorite books, The Simple Path to Wealth by J.L. Collins. He refers to this as your FU money. So like if you come to work and they just start acting up, you can say FU and walk away. Like how do we put ourselves in a position where we own our labor? That is the most important takeaway, I think, from this. And so I think, having a side hustle can serve that role and can be an outlet for things you're interested in, or, you've always had a dream. I've started sort of teaching courses and supporting women, coaching, right? And for me, the impetus behind that isn't, I need more money. How are all the ways I can find money? But it's more like, what is my work in the world? Like, what is the mission that I'm up to in the world? And what are the outlets for me to express that? And it makes me feel, so this is like all about like, how am I experiencing my life? So I feel more control of my time. I feel as if I'm bringing whatever it is I'm meant to bring to the world, that I'm doing that, and positioning myself to have more agency and more choice. So I think, if your side hustles are serving that role for you, I'm all for it. But not money for the sake of money, not extra streams of income for the sake of extra streams of income, and all of that sort of to aid ourselves in experiencing more freedom on a daily basis.
Couldn't have said it better myself. That was fantastic. Thank you. I think that's probably it, unless anyone else has any other questions or comments. A huge thank you, Paris, for joining us for this Q&A. I'm hopeful we can start doing more of these. We have monthly meetups on the program at people's places of business, so we do in-person stuff, but I think there's still room out there for virtual Q&As. So I really appreciate your time, and thank you. And thanks everyone for being here today, and thanks for all the questions.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
I'll share I'll share the recording with cohort members, alumni, and I'll put a link to it on our website as well, so people have access to it. So, okay, great. Thanks everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing it too. Thank you. Thank you,
Thanks.
Ash. Thank you, Paris.
Thanks. Bye.